When you typically think about the flu, the first thing that enters people's minds is getting the flu shot. Today, people consider it an inconvenience. However, many people would have greatly appreciated it 100 years ago. One strain of influenza was called the Spanish flu, and it affected millions of people worldwide.
They're not quite sure where it originated because it was a very hard disease to follow, but some suggest it happened in the United States. Some suggest it happened in Germany. A lot of people, because it's called the Spanish flu, think that it occurred in Spain, but that was the name it got because Spain was not in World War I when it started, and so they didn't have as much censorship, and so they were in the news was a lot of people in Spain were coming down with the flu, and so they got blamed for the name, even though it really probably didn't originate there.
It is suspected that Grayslake soldiers brought this disease back to town. While they were across the world, many contracted the virus, and when World War I ended and soldiers came home, the virus spread to their neighbors, friends, and family.
According to Grace Barrages, an infection prevention specialist at Lake Forest Medical Center, the Spanish flu, including other strands of influenza, are spread from person to person primarily through the respiratory tract. When an infected person coughs or sneezes, the virus becomes airborne. Other susceptible people around the infected person can then inhale the airborne virus and become infected.
It affects the cells in your lungs and things like that, and so what would happen is the virus would inject DNA into your cells. The cell would stop doing whatever it was supposed to be doing, which in the lung is, working on getting oxygen to your blood. It would stop doing that, and it would essentially become a virus-making factory. And then when there were enough viruses inside of that cell, the cell would burst, essentially killing the cell, and then spreading all of those more viruses to do that to more cells. So it's like,
Although we typically talk about the Spanish flu on a worldly scale, the virus actually hit home. One of the first Grayslakeans to contract the flu was Daisy Doolittle, a member of a very prominent family in Grayslake.
well, she came down with the flu. She was one of the first people that had contracted it, and from where, we don't know. But she actually contracted it, she died of it. Because she was from a very prominent family, lots of people showed up for the funeral. Well, when you have a sickness and you have mass gatherings of people, it's very easy to spread. And so in that time, they suggested that the flu actually was contracted by a lot of different people in the town, and so therefore it took off.
Doolittle Park, located on North Lake Street, was actually named after Daisy and the Doolittle family.
The strange thing about this disease is the age group it targeted. Its victims were primarily young adults and children, whereas a typical disease would target the very elderly and very young. The reason behind this was because another strain of the flu that was very similar to the Spanish flu had hit Grayslake many years prior. People who were then exposed to that virus built up an immunity of antibodies that the next generation did not have. Because of this, adults had a better chance of fighting off the disease.
Back in 1918, the healthcare system was quite poor. They actually thought at first that the flu was a bacterial disease because microbiology was nearly non-existent. Doctors were scarce and finding proper medical treatment was lucky. In fact, Grayslake didn't get their first doctor until many years later. The flu wasn't exactly what caused all these deaths, but the lack of proper treatment did. One of the suggestions for treating the flu was actually to use vapor rub. Thankfully, the medical system has advanced greatly since then. In fact, the swine flu has a nearly identical membrane composition to the Spanish flu, meaning that the proteins on the surface of the swine flu virus are very similar to that of the Spanish flu's virus. This means that a very similar virus to the Spanish flu has swept the world, however, a very small fraction of people died compared to the Spanish flu, where there were 20 to 50 million deaths. It is strange to imagine that an event that impacted the world so greatly could also impact the small town that is Grayslake.